Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Welcome to our platform. See, from today onwards, in this particular module, we are going to cover disasters and disaster management. So, as part of this GS, General Studies for UPSC and some state services, this disaster management is one of the new subjects in our syllabus. So far we have been highly concentrated on optional subject, that is anthropology. So on an experimental basis, we are trying with the general studies subjects as well. So taking the response from this particular small module, we will try to bring more and more subjects like geography, environment, polity, history, etc. So in this particular module, we are going to cover different types of disasters and disaster management for them as part of our GS paper 3, and we will also try to integrate it with different other GS subjects like geography, environment, etc. So let us try to look at what is there in this module and what we are going to learn in this particular session. So for that, let me quickly share the screen with you. Say in this topic, we are going to learn disasters and disaster management. See, as part of your syllabus for GS paper 3, UPSC simply mentions only one line, that is disaster and disaster management. But if we go through previous year questions, some of the themes from here, we get to know what are the disasters that we need to cover. Plus, if you go through daily news, okay, or current affairs or daily news analysis, so there are numerous disasters of small and big scale, which are impacting, which are disrupting the normal life, which are leading to massive impact on economy and infrastructure and various other things. So those are all the disasters which might lead to crisis situation, and we may have to manage them. Okay, so that's the cue from which I have covered numerous number of disasters. Later I'll show you what are the disasters that we are going to cover. Okay, and how we are going to cover, as I told you, we will be integrating this topic with other topics in general studies paper 1 and general studies paper 3. For example, see, disasters, their mechanism has a strong link with geography. So there are many geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, okay, or tsunamis, or landslides, or volcanic eruptions. So such phenomena are there. Similarly, there are so many meteorological and climatological disasters. So their mechanism is linked with geography. So there we will try to link this topic with geography, because कई बार ऐसे होता है डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट का जो टॉपिक्स है उनको लेकर जीएस पेपर 1 इन मेंस दे कैन बी आस्क्ड. जैसे इस बार भी क्वेश्चंस था, ट्विस्टर्स के बारे में क्वेश्चन था, टॉर्नेडोस, एंड देयर वाज ए क्वेश्चन ऑन क्लाउड बर्स्ट इन जीएस पेपर 1. ओके, सिमिलरली जीएस पेपर 3 में ज्योग्राफी को लेकर, लाइक कनेक्टिंग the topics of geography, they might ask some of the disasters and what is their impact or consequences, how they can be managed. So this is one point of connection and integration with GS paper 1. Similarly, see, disasters and disaster management is part of our GS paper 3. So in GS paper 3 there is another topic, environment. So many of these disasters are highly disastrous, highly impactful on the environment, and various aspects of the environment are impacted. So there is a direct connection between environment and disasters and disaster management. In fact, many of the environmental laws are used for disaster management. For example, Environmental Protection Act, Biological Diversity Act, Wildlife Protection Act, and Air Act, Water Act, all of them have provisions in order to deal with various disasters. So that's our second connection and integration with GS paper 3, that is environment and disaster management. Okay, so these are the two connections, and the third connection that can be made with the security aspect. Say in GS paper 3 we have internal security as well. So here we will try to link what kind of impact disasters have on the internal security as well as the border security of the country. How vulnerability increases with the disasters with respect to security. So this is another connection. Then quite a few times in your GS paper 4, such as case studies. So there will be some of the case studies to manage the crisis situation. Let's say there will be a role as a public servant or civil servant or a DM or a police officer. What is the role, or what are the let's say dilemmas, ethical dilemmas that you might be facing, and how you are going to take the short term and long term ways to deal with a crisis situation. So such kind of case studies can also be asked in your GS paper 4, that is ethics, integrity and aptitude. So there also some of the provisions that we learn here in disaster management, like the legal provisions and institutional mechanisms, and also the executive, let's say the liberty that you will have as a civil servant, as a DM, as any other individual. So we'll try to explore them. And when we approach the case studies, crisis management case studies, with this legal, judicial, institutional backing, so there will be a kind of depth in your answers, and you might score even better. And it is also useful in your real life administration. Say once you become a civil servant, disaster management is one of the primary responsibilities of a district magistrate. See, later we will understand in the disaster management there is a hierarchy. In the national level there is national disaster management, state level state disaster management, and in the district level there is district disaster management authority, which is headed by district magistrate. So one of the primary responsibilities of crisis management or management of the disasters is on a civil servant. So that is another reason why this subject has to be learned. Okay, and various provisions of this particular disaster management, along with the mechanism behind disasters. See, unless until we understand the disasters and the risk, we cannot govern it in a better manner. So for that risk governance, we need to understand the disasters. Okay, so that is the actual goal of including of this subject. Now, beyond that, is there any utility? Yes, obviously there is a utility. Even as a citizen, as a normal person, each and everyone is vulnerable to various disasters. If we can understand the disaster, and if we can know the vulnerability mapping, like let's say in your locality, what are the vulnerabilities of your area for various disasters, accordingly you can take some steps to save yourself and also your community, your locality. So in the real life also, in order to save yourself and your loved ones, your nearby and dear ones, and also to reduce the impact on infrastructure and economy, on life, etc., it the knowledge of disasters and disaster management can be highly useful. So that's the real life example, utility. So there is one utility, that is the exam. Okay, so the thing is in prelims, whatever the questions that are associated with your disasters or disaster management can be dealt with the topics like geography, environment and current affairs, etc. But in mains, we will have at least 25 marks, that is 10% of your GS paper 3 can be from this particular subject. Very small subject, like in about 10 hours or so, 10 classes we can complete this subject, but highly relevant exam point of view as well as from real life perspective. So it is highly useful. That is the reason why we are going to learn about this subject. And how we are going to learn? See, as I told you, we will be taking previous year questions and current incidents as the base, and we will integrate it with different other topics. Then we will proceed. Okay. So in this particular subject, or rather I would say in this particular lecture on this one, first we are going to understand what are disasters. So when do we call there is a disastrous event, and what is the general impact, like impact of disasters on various parameters as a whole, not specific to any particular disaster. And despite these impacts, what are the challenges that are still existing in order to mitigate them, in order to reduce their impact. Then finally we will look at what is the meaning of disaster management, and what kind of plans are there, disaster management plans are there for various disasters. Like, see, these disasters can be of like different categories, like natural disasters, man-made disasters, which are again can be subdivided based on the parameters, or based on the causes, or based on their mechanism, etc. So we will try to look at a specific disaster, what is the mechanism behind it, what are the impacts of that particular disaster or consequences of it, and how those consequences can be reduced or mitigated or prevented for better management. Okay, so that is how we are going to deal with it. I hope this is useful. So far, I think it is clear. So let us try to begin with the very first segment of this particular lecture, that is, what are the disasters? What is the meaning of a disaster? See, disaster is defined as any catastrophic situation in which the normal day-to-day life is disrupted, or the ecosystem is disrupted, and some extraordinary emergency interventions are required in order to bring that normalcy back, or in order to save and preserve the life and ecosystem. So for any such event which it which is catastrophic in nature, which can disrupt the normal pattern of the life or the ecosystem, and there is a need for emergency interventions in order to bring that normalcy back, any such event can be called as a disaster. See, sometimes they distinguish it with hazard, disaster. See, hazard is any natural and man-made phenomena which has the potential to destroy, or potential to disrupt the normalcy of the life. But if it actually disrupts, and the impact is massive scale, then that is when we are going to call it as a disaster. Okay, clear? Now, see, this is a general definition. You can write this general definition, or you can go ahead with, you can say, see, whenever we approach the general studies answers, either you can go with the general answers, that is what you understand in a basic sense. Sometimes the question are also like that, what do you understand by this so and so. So you can give any basic definition, or you can go with the standard definition. Standard definitions given by some institutions, some world organizations, or some let's say legal institutions. Like, for example, there is an act which is defining something. Environmental Protection Act defines pollution. National Disaster Management Act defines disaster. Similarly, United Nations Office on Disaster Management defines the disaster. So you can go with the some standard definition, so that will give more credence. Okay, so in this manner we will also cover, this is the general definition that we have seen, like any situation or any catastrophic situation which can disrupt the normalcy of the life or ecosystem, and there are extraordinary interventions needed in order to bring that normalcy back or preserve the lives. Or you can go with another definition given by United Nations Office on Disaster Risk Reduction, and it defines the disaster as a serious disruption of functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to an hazardous event. Okay, any hazardous event disrupting the normalcy of a community or society can be termed as a disaster. So this definition can also be given, or you can write the definition as per National Disaster Management Act. Okay, so any of these definitions are accepted, and this is the simple meaning of it. Now, are there any types of disasters? Yes, depending upon the causes or depending upon how they are created, they can be mainly divided into two types. What are they? One is the ones which are caused due to natural reasons. Another one is man-made or man-induced disasters. So what are natural disasters? See, any natural hazard that is occurring because of the natural causes, either due to act of God or due to fury of the mother nature or due to tectonic events or due to geophysical phenomena or climatological phenomena, any of them can be termed as a natural disaster. And thing about the natural disasters are, you cannot prevent them because you cannot control the mother nature. At max, what you can do is you can prepare yourself so that when that natural disaster hits, you can reduce the impact of that natural disaster. Okay, but you cannot completely avoid it or you cannot completely prevent it. Okay, now these natural disasters can be again divided into various types. For example, some of them are caused due to geophysical phenomena like earthquakes. Tectonic movements is the reason. Landslides, same tectonic movements are uplifting or thrusting or faulting are the reasons. Or it can be tsunami. Whenever tectonic movement happens or whenever there is a massive release of the energy within the oceans, then there is a displacement of water leading to tsunamis or volcanic activity. All of them are geophysical. Similarly, there can be hydrological, the ones which are related with the water, for example, floods, avalanches, etc. Similarly, climatological. See here, the climate is the reason, the mechanism is climatologically driven. For example, extreme temperatures under which you can cover, say, for example, heat waves. Okay, generally every summer we experience it. Now, every winter we experience cold waves, right? So these kind of extreme temperatures are marine heat waves. Similarly, droughts, wildfires, etc. Or meteorological, for example, cyclones, storm surges or wave surges. These are all meteorologically naturally occurring disasters. Similarly, biological, bio means biota means life or bio means life. So these are all induced by various life forms. For example, some of the epidemics which are spread by pathogens like viruses, bacteria, protozoa, fungi, etc. Or it can be zoonotic animals or zoonotic diseases which are spread by different animals. Okay, or it can be, let's say, avian influenza, swine flu, or foot and mouth disease. This kind of disasters which can impact large scale area. All of them are under natural disasters. Then the second variety, which are man-made or man-induced disasters. See, these disasters can also be called as technologically driven technologically driven disasters, because often it is technological or technical failure which can lead to that kind of disasters, or it can be human negligence or human error. So most of these disasters, they are induced by man-made activities or anthropogenic activities. Okay, so that's the reason why we call them as, or we classify them as, man-made disasters. See, some of the examples include industrial disasters or chemical disasters, nuclear accidents, urban floods, forest fires caused due to human activity, or environmental pollution, terrorism or weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear missiles, etc., when they are testified, when they are used, when they are detonated. Similarly, wars and conflicts that leads to use of these massive destruction weapons like missiles, bombs, etc., all of them can be termed as man-made or man-induced disasters. And the thing about these disasters are you can prevent completely, not just reduce. You can completely prevent if certain preventive checks are taken, if certain let's say methods are employed, some preparedness and early warning and vigilance, due vigilance in tracking or leakages or any other things. So you can completely prevent these disasters. Okay, even rail accidents you can call. Nowadays there are more and more train accidents which are happening, or aviation accidents, or oil spills. Okay, that is another thing which is missing here, oil spills. Okay, so these are all. Recently, it was in the news that there was a ruling that NZT was fining some 75 crore rupees on BPCL due to that Madras oil leak. Okay, so these kind of disasters which are mainly induced due to human activity. Now, what we are going to do is we'll try to understand, like we will take some set of disasters, we'll see what is the mechanism and all, but not here, from the next session onwards. Now, why we are so much concerned about these disasters? Because these disasters have huge impact. Okay, on general, we can see the impact of all disasters together. Then specific to a disaster, we can look at what is the impact. Okay, so first, what kind of impact they have on environment. See, this is one method of presenting your answer, particularly in the examination. How uh, the structuring of the answer, depending upon, let's say they're asking impact of disasters, so you can present it in paragraph form or point form. But if you can segregate thematically, if you can give what is the impact on economy, on society, on infrastructure, on security, so if you can write thematically, the presentation and the points, the crisp points that you are giving, they will be much better for the examiner, and also it covers more dimensions. Okay, so it's an art of like presenting. So we will be learning all these things as the time progresses. For example, here I have segregated it into different segments. So what is the impact it has on environment? Say there will be huge biodiversity loss. Whenever there is a disaster, there will be a direct impact on the lives of various animals and plants. So heavy loss of wildlife and biodiversity, it can lead to habitat destruction, loss, habitat fragmentation, and also affects the normal life pattern of various animals. Their reproductive cycles may be impacted. For example, here see some of the marine birds are died because of oil spill. Okay, so these kind of disasters can have a huge impact. Similarly, it can lead to soil erosion, soil degradation, soil pollution, slowly turning the soils into deserts. This process, what we call it as desertification, where the soil loses its physical, chemical, biological properties and its productivity reduces and slowly it turns into a desert. Okay, similarly it can lead to pollution of air, water, soil, noise pollution, radiation pollution, light pollution, many other pollutions, which is all considered as degradation of the environment. And this degradation of the environment further has impact on the biodiversity loss. Similarly, climate change. For example, you take any disaster, let's say wildfire or volcanic eruptions. Whenever this wildfires happens, there is huge emission of greenhouse gases, at least carbon dioxide. Similarly, volcanic eruptions, there is methane gas and sulfur oxides and other things. All of them are greenhouse gases. So they further aggravate the situation of the ongoing climate change. When climate change increases, the frequency of the disasters and their impact or intensity increases. So they are connected, and there is a cascading effect which can lead to huge impact on the environment. Similarly, leaching of heavy metals, for example, there are metals like mercury, okay, and there is let's say lead, arsenic, cadmium, okay, cadmium, etc. There are so many heavy metals which are very harmful for the ecosystem and also the biodiversity. When these heavy metals leach into the ecosystem, or they are taken into the animal food chain or food webs, they magnify. Say biomagnification and accumulation can happen, which can lead to deadly diseases, and slowly that also lead to biodiversity loss and degradation of the environment. Similarly, inundation, that is submergence, further that can lead to killing of so much of wildlife and flora. Similarly, invasive species like alien species or invasive species can spread, and slowly they can take over the local ecosystem and threatening the local species. So that also reduces the biodiversity. For example, water hyacinth, terror of Bengal. Similarly, you can talk about lantana. There are so much of, like, carrot grass is one of the invasive species. So those invasive species spores or their progeny can spread to different other locations, and finally leading to massive spread of invasive species, which can also lead to biodiversity loss. Similarly, what is the impact on economy? See, any disaster, be it war or any other disaster, natural or man-made, it can destabilize the economy. First of all, it can cause huge economic loss. Okay, property loss and life loss can happen, and every year it is estimated that some crores of rupees is lost. See, India is losing almost 2% of its GDP potential every year due to various disasters. अभी recently विजयवाड़ा में floods आया है, and as a result of it, almost 16,000 crore plus money has to be spent there in order to, rehabilitate and provide some relief and reconstruct that. Otherwise, that money would have been invested in infrastructure, that money would have been invested in social, like welfare activities like education, health, or skill development, which would have had long term positive impacts. So that is how it impacts. Say, whenever a disaster hits, the economy uh, shrinks, it goes in a negative manner. The opportunities and the growth potential goes in negative manner. Similarly, frequent disasters, let's say a area is prone to frequent disasters, so that area will become not so attractive for foreign direct investment. See, let's say you are an investor, where do you want to put your money? Where it is safe, where you can get good returns, not in a location where there is, like, when a disaster happens, when you are going to lose your all the fortune. You don't want to be in such uncertain location, right? So that's how disasters can impact the direct investment, foreign direct investment, technology transfer, and growth potential. Even the companies do not want to establish their presence in the locations where there are frequent disasters, right? So this is another impact, and lot of resources due to disasters, they are lost, because now you have to, provide relief measures, as I told you, or you have to reconstruct what you have already constructed. Let's say you have constructed a bridge and the bridge got collapsed due to some disaster. अब दोबारा उस bridge को बनाना पड़ेगा, उसमें भी पैसे लग जाएगा. Otherwise, you would have used that money somewhere else, right? So this kind of impact, and there is a strong link between poverty and disasters. See, there is a proven. See, disasters lead to poverty, and poor people are more vulnerable to disasters. Whenever disaster happens, they are the more hit persons. So there is a direct link. Whenever a disaster happens, the poverty rises, poverty rates rises. For example, COVID-19, it is estimated that COVID-19 has pushed almost 20 million people, that means almost like 2 crore people, into poverty once again. So we took almost 5-10 years in uplifting those poor people above below poverty line, and a disaster hits and all those people are once again thrown back to the poverty. So this is another impact on the economy. Similarly, food insecurity, चलो कोई भी disaster आता है, crop loss होगा, inundation होगा, or pathogens, or there may be pest attack, all of them will lead to like spoilage of your crops. So the agricultural yield, the food yield is going to reduce. When the yield reduces, when population is huge, the demand for food, like food security, like availability, affordability, and accessibility of the food reduces. That lead to a kind of insecurity, and that can even trigger inflation. अब सब लोग डर गया है कि खाना नहीं मिलने वाला है, तो डिमांड ज़्यादा बढ़ जाएगा कि पहले ही खरीद के होर्डिंग करने लग जाएंगे, and that leads to inflation, demand pull inflation. So inflation again is not good for the economy. Why? Whenever there is a inflation, there will be like tight monitoring policy, and there will be like sucking of the money from the economy, and people are not interested in taking the loans and investing in infrastructure or other places, and government's burden will increase because government now has to fund that rising inflation and has to reduce it. So for that, government expenditure increases. So again, it will be a burden on the exchequer, and the ultimately it is the people who suffer. Higher taxes, higher burden. Okay. Similarly, unemployment rate increases whenever a disaster happens. It can lead to unemployment. COVID-19 में देखो कितने लोगों का job loss हो गया है, and the trend is still continuing, particularly in the IT sector, and people are like, say, as the companies are going towards automation and other things in order to reduce their impact or reduce their vulnerability to disasters and increase their productivity, तो unemployment rates slowly increase होते जा रहे हैं. Even बड़े बड़े companies like Meta, Google, etc., they are also giving the layoffs. Okay, so these are all some of the impacts on economy. Then what impact it has on the society? See, a disaster can change the family dynamics. अब कोविड-19 टाइम पीरियड में देखो कितना फैमिली क्राइसिस हुआ था, कोई कहीं और जगह पे फंस गया है, या इवन दे आर एट वन लोकेशन, देर आर सम मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग्स एंड डिस्ट्रप्शंस इन द फैमिली एंड अफेक्टिंग द पीपल टू पीपल रिलेशंस. फॉर एग्जांपल, whenever a disaster happens, obviously those regions will be cut off from the main society, and as a result of it, the physical as well as digital connections will be lost. So the family members will be of fear, like there is a lot of fear whether the persons, their loved ones and dear ones, are safe or not. For example, some event happens in some location where you are living and your parents are living somewhere else. So the moment they see some news, immediately they will be terrified to know whether you are safe or not. Immediately they will call you and know, and if the call is not connected, there will be emotional stress on them, like whether you are safe or not. So this kind of impact and change of family dynamics due to loss of communication. Then migrations, mass migrations, you can call it as exodus, can happen. For example, when there was a COVID-19, so there was mass exodus from urban areas to their rural areas. Similarly, climate driven exodus, for example, be it climate driven crisis, people are leaving their ancestral locations because there is lack of resources, there is even scarcity of the resources. पानी नहीं मिल रहा है तो एरिया छोड़कर जाना है, बारिश नहीं हो रहा है, एग्रीकल्चरल एक्टिविटी नहीं कर सकते हैं, so villages, they are leaving the villages and going to the urban areas in order to have some employment opportunities, waged employment opportunities. All these migrations have another set of problems, उसको भी हम different dimensions में cover कर सकते हैं. Infrastructural resources के ऊपर प्रेशर पड़ता है, slum growth in the towns, क्राइम रेट बढ़ सकता है, कल्चरल चेंज हो सकता है. So many impacts. Similarly, physically destroys all the important social institutions, maybe community building or a hospital or a school or any other such a road or a communication tower. So such kind of infrastructure can be damaged, which can have impact on the society's normal working. Similarly, it obstructs the communities ability to conduct day-to-day activities. अगर disaster हो गया, you cannot have your day-to-day normal life, so that seriously impacts, and there can be a trauma, post-disaster trauma. Later we will see post-disaster trauma analysis also gives us certain lessons how to deal with the disasters. Similarly, severely hampers the development process, and community could become over dependent on the state. कैसे? Resources के लिए. When all of your livelihood means are gone, your property or your whatever, that food etc are gone, now you are the situation of a mendicancy, and you will be asking the state to provide some sort of relief and rehabilitation. And the state, as it is providing certain sort of relief, it is a burden on the state, and also you also will have the issue. See, there can be no lack of these resources, and as a result of it, you may not be getting the uh, relief. So this kind of impacts, or aid from external institutions, that is the seeking of aid from external institutions. These are all some of the issues on society. Plus insecurity. See, society में एक insecurity और थोड़ा crime rate भी बढ़ने का chance होता है. For example, COVID-19 time period पे there are many couple who went for voluntary abortions because the situation was so uncertain. We do not know what happens tomorrow. So many of the commissioning couple, they wanted to hold and see the situation. They don't want their child to be born in such uncertain world. So they went for, if possible, they went for abortions. That has directly impacted our demography. Say अभी नेशनल हेल्थ सर्वे, फैमिली हेल्थ सर्वे आया है, फिफ्थ रिपोर्ट. इसमें we found that the total fertility rate was less than 2.1. 2.1 is generally considered as a replacement rate in order to maintain your human resources, but ट्रेंड ऐसे है कि 2 बच्चे से भी कम पैदा कर रहा है on average of entire national average. So one of the direct impact why there is a sudden sharp decline is that COVID-19 also. During those time, many people did not go for it. Even there is a change because of, as we are going ahead with your more educational opportunities and delayed marriages and more economic independence. So this is a trend. Generally, you can see that trend towards your fourth phase of your डेमोग्राफिक ट्रांजिशन. अभी थर्ड का आसपास है हम लोग. ठीक है. सो दिस आर ऑल सम इम्पैक्ट्स ऑन सोसाइटी. देन व्हाट इम्पैक्ट इट हैज ऑन द क्रिटिकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर and security. See, critical infrastructure is that which is essential for day-to-day administration in the country. For example, health services, communication, financial services like banking, transportation, defense, satellite services, all of them considered as critical infrastructure. They are all highly vulnerable to cyber attacks, to disasters, etc. So if a disaster happens and it impacts the critical infrastructure, it will have a direct impact on the security of the nation. For example, आपका डिफेंस वाला जो लाइन अगर ठीक से काम नहीं कर रहा है, then the external aggression can happen, or armed rebellion can happen, or secessionist movements can happen. So that kind of vulnerability is there, which can damage our unity and integrity and territorial integrity of the country. Plus, when a disaster disrupts this critical infrastructure of a country, it becomes more vulnerable to security challenges. It may be cyber security or it may be physical security challenge. Okay, so this is another impact. See, there are initiatives to make this critical infrastructure disaster resilient. We will discuss it under security aspect, not now. So these are all some impacts on various parameters. अब देखो points तो बता दिया, but it has to be given some credence with the data, ताकि इसको substantiate करना, इसको justify करना. That's where we are bringing such data related to it to see what is the impact on the global level and also Indian level. See, globally, almost between these 2 decades of time, 2000 to 2020, there were over 7,000 disasters affecting 4 billion people. See, India world का population कितना है? 8.2 billion है. Almost 50% of the world population got affected due to disasters, particularly during this 21st century, the beginning of the 21st century, due to enhanced climate change. Frequent extreme events हो रहा है. For example, El Nino, La Nina, cyclones, और फॉरेस्ट फायर्स, बुश फायर्स, ओके, लैंडस्लाइड्स, अर्थक्वेक्स, कितना मैसिव अर्थक्वेक्स हुआ था, तुर्की का अर्थक्वेक, मोराको का अर्थक्वेक, ओके, एंड नो एक्सप्लोजन्स, बीरूट के एक्सप्लोजन्स, एंड कोविड-19 कैसे बोल सकते हैं, विच हैज इम्पैक्टेड मेनी पीपल्स लाइफ. So this is the global impact, and almost 1.23 million people died only due to heat waves and earthquakes. अब बाकी floods, climate change, pollution, सब चीजें ऐड करेंगे तो numbers are in crores. Similarly, there is an economic loss of almost 3 trillion dollars. 1 trillion is 1 lakh crore dollars. Okay, multiply it with 80 lakh crore रुपीज ऑफ द इनटू 3, क्योंकि 3 ट्रिलियन बता रहा है, इतना पैसे लॉस हुआ है बिकॉज ऑफ दिस डिजास्टर्स. ओके, the worst impacted ones are the coastal states and small island nations. That is the reason why damage and वो वाला फंड लेकर आया है हमने, लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड, लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड, रिसेंटली द सीओपी दुबई वाला, यूएई वाला COP में we have operationalized it also in order to provide some relief for the damage that has already occurred. And displaced around, say, within this time period or within only 2020 alone, almost 30 million people were displaced globally due to climate issues and disasters. Even if you look at India, India is also highly vulnerable, so it's no exception with respect to these disasters. So it has frequent occurrences of floods, cyclones, earthquakes, heat waves, cold waves, or rail accidents, and many other things, industrial accidents and all. And as a result of it, there's like 3,100 people per year are dying, and almost for 1 decade this trend continued. Even economic loss also, almost $87 billion of the money lost during that 2 decades of time period. And annually, almost 2% of our GDP is lost due to these disasters. Over 4 million people got displaced in 2020 itself. Climate change. See, in the vulnerability, India is highly vulnerable and ranked 7th in the global climate risk index. So these are all showing the impact and vulnerability of India as well. So under these circumstances, it was necessary to have a dedicated disaster management plan. और लेकर भी आया है, कैसे 2005 on the backdrop of like Bhuj earthquake of 2001 and tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, हमने नेशनल डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट एक्ट भी बनाया है. And paradigm shift was there from the reactive to proactive mode. But despite such efforts, why the disaster management is still a challenge for us? What issues are still persisting? So for that, let us see what are the challenges associated with these disasters. Despite these many efforts, almost it's been 20 years since Disaster Management Act came. Still, India's vulnerability is still high, and it is still impacting a lot. So what kind of issues are there with respect to this, and why we are not able to reduce? What are the actual challenges? See, the challenges are lack of hazard and vulnerability mapping. Pehle you need to know which disaster is happening in which location, why that is happening there, and who are the vulnerable people. See, this vulnerability mapping and hazard mapping, which we also call it as hazard zonation, is very, very important to know the occurrence, temporal and spatial occurrence. Temporal मतलब time period होता है. Say cyclones हर time period पे नहीं होता है. एक specific months are there where the cyclones frequency is more, क्योंकि उस time पे conditions are more favorable for forming of the cyclones. Similarly, earthquakes भी हर जगह पे नहीं आता है. There are certain seismically active locations. Knowing those locations, and in those locations who are the vulnerable people and how can we map that vulnerability is needed. That was one of the lacking issues. Then lack of awareness and understanding on the disasters and disaster management, and incorporation of the disaster management in the local level. देखो, disasters national phenomena नहीं है कि disaster happens on highly localized manner. Maximum to maximum, a big area or maybe a district or maybe 2-3 districts will be more vulnerable to some disaster. So that specific location needs to incorporate the disaster management, which was lacking. Okay, and lack of coordination. See, whenever a disaster happens, various institutions and organizations have to work together to reduce that impact, to mitigate it, to prevent it, to provide the response. But अगर यहाँ पर कोऑर्डिनेशन मिस हो जाता है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल नेशनल लेवल, स्टेट लेवल, डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल का एक कोऑर्डिनेशन मिस हो गया, या देर आर वेरियस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हुज कोऑर्डिनेशन इज नीडेड विच इज मिस्ड, then the impact will be much higher. ठीक है, सिमिलरली एब्सेंस ऑफ प्रॉपर गाइडलाइंस. सी डिजास्टर्स एंड डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट जो है वो स्टेट लिस्ट में आता है, इट इज पार्ट ऑफ अवर स्टेट लिस्ट, आर्टिकल 246 7th schedule. So under state list, each and every state, they have their own set of guidelines, they have their own set of definitions, they have their own set of response and relief and management plans. So uniformity nahi hai national level pe. So as a result of it, there were lack of proper guidelines. Of course this has been taken care with the 2016 national disaster management प्लान. ठीक है, बाद में डिस्कस करते हैं उसका, बट दिस इज ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द चैलेंज वाई वी लैक्ड सो फॉर. देन लैक ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट. सी एक तो private sector is not interested in investing in disaster management. See, almost 96% of the investment is coming from only public, that is the government. Only 4% is coming from private, that too as a CSR. Okay, corporate social responsibilities. Why private sector is not interested in disaster management? Returns कम है, ठीक है, and there is no proper incentives for bringing the private sector into disaster management. But impact तो दोनों पे बराबर पड़ता है. इनफैक्ट प्राइवेट सेक्टर पे ज़्यादा इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा, ठीक है. बट and public, government के पास तो पैसे कम है, because the government has to take care of the defense, take care of the social welfare measures, take care of salaries and other many other things, and as a result of it there is a limitation on government spending. So due to all these things, it's becoming difficult to become डिजास्टर रेजिलियंट. इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को डिजास्टर रेजिलियंट नहीं बना पा रहा है. सिमिलरली क्लाइमेट चेंज इज अनदर रीजन. सी लास्ट 2 decades it has been like the global average temperatures are increasing at a massive rate. As a result of it, the impact on various parameters. Similarly, unplanned urbanization, underdevelopment, poverty. See, these are all some of the persisting challenges why India is still vulnerable to disasters. And threat of pandemics like COVID-19, once in a century disasters. So these are all some of the challenges which are limiting the potential, limiting us in mitigating and reducing the disaster risk. Okay, now under these circumstances, it is highly need of the hour in order to have a strong disaster management. So first of all, let us see what is the meaning of disaster management. Then we can see what are the various stages under disaster management and what kind of mitigation and management can be taken for each of the disasters. Okay, so first of all, to begin with disaster management. So it can be defined as organization and management of resources and responsibilities for dealing with any kind of hazardous or disastrous event in order to provide humanitarian support, but in particular with respect to preparedness and response recovery in order to lessen the impact, if possible completely mitigate the impact. So that is what we call it as management, disaster management. You can simply say it is taking or not taking certain steps in order to reduce the impact of the disasters or taking a step further to completely prevent it. इसके अंदर mainly 4 steps are there. What are those steps? Number 1, preparedness, mitigation, recovery, response. Actually, response is the third one, and then fourth one is the recovery. See, this can be divided into 2. One is like before the disaster, pre-disaster measures or pre-disaster steps, and ड्यूरिंग द डिजास्टर एंड आफ्टर द डिजास्टर. अब प्री डिजास्टर में हम क्या कर सकते हैं बिफोर डिजास्टर? वन इज मिटिगेशन. मिटिगेशन का मतलब क्या है? टेकिंग ऑल द प्रिवेंटिव स्टेप्स, कंप्लीटली रोकना या डिजास्टर का इंपैक्ट को मिनिमाइज करना. सो ऑल दो स्टेप्स टुगेदर वी कैन कॉल इट एज मिटिगेशन. से अंडर दिस इंक्लूड्स कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग, ट्रेनिंग, hazard mapping, using of the technology to have the early warning, about the disasters, or having a strong information dissemination, or promoting disaster resilient communities and disaster resilient infrastructure. मतलब डिजास्टर होने से पहले ही उसका लोकेशन को पता करके, रीजंस को पता करके, उसको कम करने के लिए क्या क्या स्टेप्स ले सकते हैं, दैट कम्स अंडर मिटिगेशन, वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट स्टेप. देन सेकेंड वन इज प्रिपेयर्डनेस. सी कुछ डिजास्टर्स ऐसे होते हैं यू कैन नॉट अवॉइड देम, you cannot control the disasters, you cannot control the fury of the mother nature. In such situations it is certain that the disaster is going to happen. Under those circumstances, what you can take or what you can do is prepare yourself. That disaster is going to come. Now you prepare yourself to reduce the impact of it. You try to evacuate the people from the disastrous location and try to provide or try to ensure yourself that you have all the resources available. For example, resources like you can say information dissemination or early warning, or you can say you know bringing all the essentials like food, water, human resources, health facilities, all the humanitarian support that can be given to the people. Okay, this can be another step. So such all the activities and measures taken before an hazardous event in order to provide lightning response and reduce the impact is called preparedness. This is the second step. Then the third step is during the disaster. See, whenever a disaster hits, what you have to do? Immediately you have to respond and provide the relief. So that's your third step. Response and relief during or immediately after the disaster. So take such measures in such a manner on either during or after the disaster, providing the food, shelter, medicine, hospitality, or any other necessities in order to minimize the effect of that disaster. So this is what we call it as response and relief. Okay, and see, during this time, once the post disaster happens, we need to assess what are the post disaster needs assessment. So this needs assessment is going to help us learn. We can learn from the previous experience. When a disaster happens, what are the needs that are required on a priority basis, so that we can provide relief to the people, reduce the economic loss, or reduce the physical or infrastructural damage. Okay, so that's why see 15th Finance Commission जो recommendations में it made it that post disaster needs assessment के लिए भी कुछ budget separately रखना है. You keep some budget for post disaster needs assessment, so that we can learn from the previous experience and we can inculcate it during the last stage, that is recovery, reconstruction, rehabilitation stage. See, whenever a disaster happens, after the disaster you need to bring back the normalcy. So that happens with recovery, reconstruction, rehabilitation. Now you take this as an opportunity by properly studying that disaster in order to reduce its impact in the coming times. So for that you make that particular location disaster resilient. इसमें क्या कर सकते हैं आप? You can take the mitigation measures now while recovering, while reconstructing. Invest in the infrastructure, make it disaster resilient. Train your local communities, or repair the critical infrastructure. Make your infrastructure, rebuild your infrastructure in such a manner that it is resistant to the coming such disasters. So these are all the steps that can be taken in rehabilitation, recovery, or reconstruction. This is the fourth stage. So these are all the 4 stages in disaster management cycle. Now what we can do is, for each of the disaster from the coming session onwards, we can take different disasters. First, we will begin with the natural disaster. We will take a disaster. We will try to see what are the impacts or mechanism behind it. First mechanism, then the causes behind it, mechanism, if consequences or impacts if possible. Then we will go for how mitigation and management can be taken with respect to that particular disaster to reduce its impact. In that manner, we can cover all and see what kind of rehabilitation, recovery, preparedness, and response measures along with mitigation measures can be taken care. Okay, so this is what we are going to cover. I hope all this session, this today's or in this particular lectures discussion is clear. If it is clear, just let us know in the comment section, and these annotations and the PPT you can access it from our Telegram or WhatsApp channels, and those who are already registered on the website, you can get it from the website. Okay, so I hope it is useful. Do give us your feedback to continue this series, and we will be covering all the natural disasters, all the man-made disasters. In the next session, I'll show you the list of all of them. Okay, so that's it for this particular session. I hope it is useful and enjoyable. See you in the next session with a continuation of various disasters and how to deal with them. Thank you very much, guys. See you in the next session. Bye.